All right, howdy folks. Since book tour and conventions are still somewhat on hold for a bit, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster Season 5, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Now, most of us here tonight are fans of great crime stories and mysteries, but collectively, we've been living in one of the most fractious times in recent history in regards to social unrest. That's what we'll be discussing tonight as current and former members of the criminal justice system, who are also authors, walk us through CSI Cops and Crime Fiction Part 2, Racial Injustice. On our panel tonight is my friend Mark Olshaker, who along with real-life FBI profiler John Douglas, wrote the seminal book Mindhunter, which became the incredible Netflix series of the same name, and hopefully a season 3 to come. Mark is also an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and author of 12 nonfiction books, including Einstein's Brain and The Edge. Mark is also past president of the Norman Mailer Society and a director of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Russ.
All right. Also on our panel is my good friend, John French, a retired crime scene investigator from Baltimore with more than 40 years experience. John is also a short story writer and editor who specializes in pulp and crime stories, which can be found in the excellent collection, The Last Redhead, while current projects include novels featuring Frankenstein and Dracula, the anthology Horns and Halos, and Mortal Sins. Welcome back, John.
Thanks, Russ. Good to be here.
All right. And finally, please welcome my pal, Michael A. Ventrella, a practicing attorney. Michael also writes humorous adventure novels, including Bloodsuckers, A Vampire Runs for President, Big Stick, and Terran Ostler and the War of the Words. He also edits anthologies, including the Sherlock Holmes-themed Baker Street Irregular series, Across the Universe, Release the Virgins, and the upcoming Three Time Travelers Walk In 2. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Russ. I'm glad to be here.
All right. All right. So before we get started tonight, I want to say a few words. I've interviewed nearly 100 guests on the show thus far, and this is one of the only times I felt a need to give a little bit of a caveat. Yes, we're going to be touching on some hot button issues tonight, but I want to clarify that our objectives are to have a sober, responsible, respectful adult conversation about these social dilemmas and how, given that we're authors, we might talk about how to talk about them. And where we can, inject a little levity in an environment that's been a bit tense. Now, I also want to address the elephant in the room. I realize that we are 4 white males on this panel and not as representative of the overall community as perhaps would be ideal. But I did offer speaking slots to other authors, including people of color, and they declined for personal reasons. So please understand, I am sensitive to the optics of this panel, and I hope that everyone who's watching will keep an open mind. Okay, with that out of the way, for those of you tuning in, feel free to send me questions or comments for me or the panel in the chat box throughout the show, and we'll get to some at the end. All right, since it just came up, we're seeing in various cities, including New York, where groups of police officers and firefighters are refusing to get vaccinated. Now, to me, I would think that given these roles, being on the front lines and dealing with populations least likely to be vaccinated and thus more likely to test positive for COVID, the homeless, criminals, people with severe mental illness, drug addiction, and other underlying health conditions, that these workers who have bravely, and I want to acknowledge this, have bravely sworn their lives to help their fellow citizens would want to be vaccinated if for no other reason than to protect themselves. Am I missing something? Mark?
I don't think you are, Russ. As we've acknowledged on my previous visits to your show, I also write about public health, another of the mysteries that can kill you, with Dr. Michael Osterholm of the University of Minnesota, who a lot of you have seen on television the last 18 months or so. And I don't see the reason why they wouldn't get vaccinated. I mean, there are certain situations, the military, where you're required to get vaccinated. And the way I look at it is, how do you feel about having people drive without insurance? Should they be allowed to do that? No, because they affect other people. I think this is the same logic. I mean, I'd like to hear from Michael from a legal point of view on this, and John from an experiential point of view, but that's the way I feel.
Michael.
Well, I obviously agree that they should be vaccinated. If they've taken an oath of office to protect the public, that would also mean protecting the public's health. So when an officer or a hospital worker says, I'm not going to get vaccinated, well, to me, that's a job requirement. You really have to get vaccinated because your job is to protect everyone. I don't think there's any sort of issues concerning employment. In other words, I don't think you can complain, well, I'm going to lose my job if I don't do it. Well, sorry, that's what we require of you. I don't have much more to add to that, really. It seems pretty clear cut to me.
I mean, let me ask you, Michael, since you're working still actively in the legal system, like what's your experience? So do you go in the tombs at all out of necessity to deal with your clients?
Well, what we've been doing, it depends on where I go. In my county, which is honestly a little more blue than some of the counties here in Pennsylvania, they've been very strict about making sure that everyone who comes to the courthouse wears a mask. And they've also done a lot of hearings by Zoom whenever possible and done a lot of things by paper whenever possible. But sometimes you have to get into the courtroom. Obviously you can't do a trial without some sort of provisions. And so they're separating the jurors as much as possible. They're using screens so people can see, even though we're standing far apart from each other. They're doing everything they can to make it more safe for everyone, which I really appreciate. But then if I drive 20 miles out to another county, they're not doing that at all. It's really, I'm like the only one wearing a mask, and that kind of bothers me. And so I'm not taking cases outside of the county anymore, to be honest.
Right. So John, you were a CSI for 40 years. So you've probably swabbed, analyzed every droplet that we could possibly think of, thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And you've seen up close and personal, literally what happens to the human body when bad things happen. So, and you work closely with police. So what's your take on this?
Okay, my take on it is, first of all, the police department has been dealing with vaccinations and with pathogenic diseases, for the last 40 years. One of the first things you are offered when, at least I'm just speaking about the Baltimore City Police Department, one of the first things you are offered, well, not offered, but one of the first things you do when you join the department is go through a class on bloodborne pathogens. So you know exactly some of the stuff out there that can kill you. Then you're offered the hepatitis vaccine. Now, under OSHA, you do have the option to opt out, but I don't know of anybody who did. And this is, again, free of charge. And you are given intense instruction on how to protect yourself from, basically in the department, it's bloodborne pathogens. So I can understand, and I was probably more comfortable with the restrictions of the current pandemic than a lot of people, because I'd been through it at work, wearing gloves, wearing masks, being very careful, not to get anything on you or in you that could kill you. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. But what I don't understand is a resistance to getting the vaccine. I mean, when you think about what could happen to you should you get this disease, should you become infected, should you wind up in the hospital, when you think about all that could happen to you that can be prevented with a tiny little injection, it just doesn't make sense for people who serve the public, such as first responders, medical people, and frankly, I'm not that comfortable with people who make that kind of bad decision being responsible for my health and safety and other people's health and safety.
I think John makes an excellent point, which is it's a matter of judgment too, because yes, there are some minimal risks to the vaccine, but not getting the vaccine is not a risk-free proposition either. I mean, it's much riskier not to get it. And in terms of people who deal with the public, this is a transmissible disease. This is airborne, it's aerosol. And so you are putting the public at risk if you do not get the vaccine.
Right.
It's
So
kind of sad to hear. The studies have shown in the last year, the leading cause of death for police officers in 2020 was COVID. It
Yeah,
wasn't being
something-
shot, it wasn't accidents.
wow, is that right? I didn't know
Yep.
that. Wow.
Yeah, Michael's absolutely right.
Wow. Huh. Wow. That's, hey, Mike, when you get a chance, if you have that study, can you send it to me? I just want to take a look at it if you happen to see it.
Yeah, I posted it on my Facebook page.
Oh, you did?
I'll find it. Yeah,
Great.
I'll find it for you.
All right. So I want to kind of take actually a different point of view just for a moment about the same issue. So I spoke to a cop buddy of mine recently, and I asked him, how are things going? And he said, it's a total nightmare, which is understandable. So I would think that even under ideal circumstances, being a police officer is a very difficult job, taxing, stressful, and sometimes very dangerous. Of course, every situation is a little bit different, but you're putting your life on the line to protect the public. But during the pandemic, it's been absolutely brutal for them. Why do you think that more people aren't sympathetic to the pressure that police, EMTs, doctors, and ER staffs who are under siege and putting their health and sanity on the line? Like, why isn't there more sympathy for them?
I have plenty of sympathy for them. I don't have sympathy for the ones who aren't doing things to make things better. I have no sympathy for the cops who refuse to get their shots. I have no sympathy for the doctors or the nurses who refuse to get their shots. But those who are doing what they can to help everyone, why shouldn't I be thankful for them? I'm not sure what your question is. It's the ones who aren't cooperating. It's like the police always said, if you cooperate and follow the rules, then there's no problem. Well, they need to follow the rules.
Right. Okay, so from my point of view, and I want to hear from you guys, it seems lazy, if not reckless and irresponsible, to address all police with one brushstroke. Not all cops are great and wonderful, and not all cops are bad actors. So in terms of, so we're writers, and we, write crime and nonfiction and genre fiction where there's mystery and crime and police and whatnot. One of the oldest and maybe cliched storylines is the bad or the dirty cop. But as writers, how do you think we should handle police issues in an age where incidents of police violence and mistreatment are in the news more than ever? Let me start with John.
Okay. First of all, as far historically, if you look at Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, all the classics, you very seldom, you might see some not very bright police officers. You may see some police officers and detectives who are stuck in tradition, but you don't see any bad cops, or to use the British version, bent coppers. I think it started in I don't know about anything, but I think it started with the cults, where you actually have maybe not dishonest cops, but you have brutal cops, where it's a a trope of detective fiction where the detective gets called in and undergoes, shall we say, rigorous examination. But nowadays, and reverse it, you had where you had the cops who would basically had the good guy cops basically had the attitude of, you're coming in with a pretty face and information, you're not leaving with both. And but we can't do that anymore. We have to present reality. Like you said, not all cops are golden, not all cops are tarnished. Just like there are bad people and good people in every profession. There are good ministers. There are bad ministers. there are good nurses, there are bad nurses, and all that. So so we have to address the reality when we're writing crime fiction. We have to address the reality of, there are good cops and there are bad cops, and the definition of bad cop is changing. A bad cop is not just one who is on the take, but a bad cop is one who, no offense, Mark, profiles a suspect simply because of their race or religion. And it's our job as writers to show that this is no longer an accepted thing.
Yeah, I agree with everything John said. And I think the lesson of what John is saying is that we as writers have to really get into characterization. I mean, you have to describe individuals, not tropes, not ciphers, not types. So if you have an individual character who is a good cop, a bad cop, or something else, as long as you give that character its psychological underpinnings, the reader's going to understand and appreciate it.
Yeah.
If I can talk about a little bit,
Please.
some of the bad cops that John was talking about were back in the days before the Supreme Court came down and said, you guys can't do this anymore. Back in the 20s and 30s, that was common and no one thought anything of it. That's what cops do in order to catch the bad guys. Now there's all kinds of restrictions on the cops. Now the cops we consider bad cops are the ones that don't follow the rules, who profile, do things like that. And trust me, I can name some. So it's a little bit different attitude, but we also still see that in fiction, especially on TV shows, where the cop who breaks the rules in order to catch the bad guy is the hero. And at the end, it doesn't matter if he broke all the rules because he caught the bad guy, the ends justify the means. That's still a bad cop. The problem is there are plenty of shows that cheer that on. And I don't know how you break that.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to being realistic about character. I mean, one of the things that I've said, God, I don't know how many interviews, podcasts, television shows, whatever, is as attractive a character as Hannibal Lecter is, there's nobody like that in real life. Real criminals, real serial killers are not like that. And so, to the extent that we can, I think it's very important to try in fiction and crime fact, true crime, to render these people as they really are. And, I think we're fortunate here in that Michael and John both have the experience to be able to do that.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. So,
If I may call,
please.
there was, now I apologize in advance to all you Law and Order Special Victims Unit fans, but there was a character on Law and Order SVU called Stabler. And I used to refer to as Unstabler because, he wasn't the best cop. And they recently brought him back in Law and Order Organized Crime. I watched one episode and realized that they hadn't learned anything, that he's basically the same character he was before. And I wonder, was it because that everybody likes that character? Because there was no redemption. There was no, if you can have a bad cop, like, somebody who's a brutal cop, and if he realizes, what he's done wrong and he seeks to change, well then, yeah, that's a nice storyline. But if he just goes back to doing the same thing, then all you're doing is perpetuating the stereotype of the lone wolf.
John, I'm really curious to know what you, being part of Baltimore PD, what you thought of The Wire, which I greatly admired.
The Wire.
we talked.
I probably stepped into something here, but
No. I loved the TV show Homicide up for most of the seasons. I loved David Simon's book, The Corner. It was a hard read, but a very good read if you want to understand, a little bit about the drug culture in a big city, or even Baltimore. But The Wire, I watched it. I tried to watch it twice, and I was working at the time. And each time I watched it, I felt like I had to put in for overtime. So it just never grabbed me.
I actually just rewatched the whole series. The first 4 seasons are great. The 5th one, in retrospect, is a little wobbly, but I'm a big fan. But I got to move on. I got a lot more questions. So sticking with the police theme. So one of my favorite recent comedy series, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, apparently tossed out the original scripts for the final season that just wrapped and completely rewrote them to address, with humor, of course, the issues that have arisen in the police force, including poor treatment of civilians and prisoners and refusal among several precincts to acknowledge their bad actors. Now, are we permitted to address these issues with humor, or do you, as a writer or even as a citizen, do you fear being excoriated by readers who simply have no sense of humor about these issues, regardless of which side of the argument that you're on?
I write what I want to write, and I really don't care. Well, I care, but I don't change what I write based on what I think the public wants. My novel Bloodsuckers has a lot of politics in it. Some of the politics are going to anger some people, but there's also a lot of humor in it. And same thing with my Big Stick, which is a steampunk adventure with Teddy Roosevelt. There's lots of politics about racism that existed at the time, but it's subtext. You don't want to preach, and if you preach in your book, I think that's the worst thing. I hate being preached to, even if I agree with the person. Give me a good story, and in the story, you can give lessons without hitting anyone over the head with it.
Absolutely agree. The reason people read what we write or watch what we put on television is because of the story and the insight they get into characters. If we start preaching, we've lost.
I've stopped reading some authors because even though they had subtle messages in their novels, they suddenly shifted to preaching, and it's not what I'm paying my money for. Right. As far as whether we can deal with we should deal with serious topics with maybe and leaven it with humor. I think you have to. There's something called cop humor. I'm sure doctors and nurses have the same kind of thing. It's mainly we laugh, and I'm not a cop. I never have been a cop, but I've been on crime scenes, and there are things that are not funny to anyone else, but we laugh because if we didn't, we'd cry. And catch me when we're not recording, and I'll give you some examples.
Which I definitely will.
And they've actually there's 1 or 2 examples in an old book called Past Sins, but because that's how cops actually talk on crime scenes.
Right.
I won't mention who, but I once had a really nice discussion about the current Batman issue with a member of the command staff with a dead body not 10 feet away. So you have to inject humor because we as people inject humor. Mm-hmm. Little things like, they're talking about a serious situation where somebody is asking my character, Matthew Grace, to rethink his conclusions. Because Matthew, we really need a win here. And Grace's attitude was, well, yeah, so do the Orioles, and they've got a better manager. So you have to put in the humor. Just Shakespeare's tragedy has humor in it. So, and he was much better than we are.
Shakespeare's tragedies had humor, a lot of it sometimes, and his comedies had a lot of pathos.
Right.
I think, I write about some pretty grim subjects, but whenever you can put in humor or satire, I mean, we're all adults. We know when it's appropriate and when it fits. And, sometimes just humor comes out of the bizarre claims or situations that the predator or the offender might say. I mean, you say, can you believe that?
Right. All right. So one last item about the police. Let's talk about the hot potato. All right. Defund the police. It's a phrase that has been tossed around like a grenade. What its actual meaning intends and what the meaning feels like are quite different. So I can tell you this. So I work in real estate, but I'm in the media. I'm a media consultant. I've been working in the media. I'm a communication specialist. I've been doing media work for 25 years. Personally, I can't think of a worse phrase to describe a sensitive situation. I don't know that I've ever heard one worse than that, but not only mean worse that it's bad, but that the phraseology is terrible. Give me your thoughts about what's happening in regard to defund the police and how perhaps we could reframe the messaging so that it addresses the core issues that the phrase was meant to deal with.
It's the dumbest phrase and slogan of all time. It's been an absolute bane to the Democrats. When you take it literally, as they did in one precinct in Seattle, it's an absolute disaster. And why I never understood, even the people who were on the radical side of that, why they didn't just say reform the police, which is what we're really talking about, isn't it? Defund is a terrifying concept.
Absolutely. Now, I have a liberal blog, and I don't shy away from my viewpoints, but I had a lot of people get mad at me when I said, you guys have got to stop saying this. This is terrible publicity. It's just not right. If there's one thing that the right knows how to do, it's how to phrase things properly. You know, instead of calling it an estate tax, they call it a death tax. And everyone goes, oh, I'm afraid of a death tax. You know, they're very good at phrasing things in a way to make people get on their side. And we liberals are terrible at that. And so I think defund the police, while the idea behind it makes sense, it's really not defunding the police. It's reallocating the money in different ways. But that takes too long. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker.
Right, but let's just talk about this for a minute. So if I understand correctly, the intention behind the phrase is to take some of the funding that would go to just the police in general and carve it out so that the police themselves are dealing with fewer sort of domestic issues. Right.
It has worked in certain communities where basically if you call 911 and there's somebody who is threatening to commit suicide, you don't send the police there, you send healthcare people there. And I've had cases where I had a case where a guy was threatening to commit suicide. The police showed up, he gets into the fight with the police, they drag him away and he gets thrown in jail. And that was like, that doesn't help him. That wasn't, you know, that's not every problem can be solved with a gun or with violence. And the police should not be in certain situations where they're not making things better.
Well, and the problem is the police are the default solution because we don't have another way of doing it. I mean, there's certainly, you know, any kind of social service that the city or municipality, but we're talking about, can provide. Absolutely, if that's more appropriate. The police don't want to deal with this any more than we do. I mean, I can tell you from, you know, I've never met a police officer who's wanted to deal with a domestic situation. They hate it. They absolutely hate it, but they're the ones who have to deal with it because there's nobody else to deal with it. If you can find somebody better, great. And the police will love you for
it. That's the sad part. The police should be on our side in this, but we phrase it so terribly that they're not.
Right.
Exactly right.
We've made enemies of the people that we want on our side.
Yeah, and you also have to think about that in addition to the men and women in the police department who are out there on the street actually doing the work, you also have a bureaucracy. And no bureaucracy wants to have its funding taken away. But I'll give you an example of a reallocation of funds that took place in Baltimore around 1970. William Donald Schaefer was brought up from Florida to be the new police commissioner. The first thing he did was look at the police department where just about every job was done by a police officer. And he said, and he decided, if a job does not require you to investigate a crime, to patrol the streets, or to make an arrest, it can be done by somebody who does not have a badge. And he started with the administrative, he moved into the medical section, and he is the reason why I became a crime scene investigator, because he de-policed the crime law. Within 2 years of Pomelo, very few police officers, foreign officers, were working crime scenes, as crime scene investigators. There were only a handful who were still comparing firearms or examining latent prints. Everything was being done by civilians. It cost the department less money, and just using the statistics from latent print examinations, last year, the crime scene unit was fully policed, and the latent print unit was full police. They made 40 identifications. The first full year, when it was all civilians, they made 400 identifications, because that was our only job.
Fundamentally, it really sounds like that the thesis behind, take the phrase aside, that the thesis is something that everyone should sort of collectively be on board with. Let the police do what they do best and what we want them to be doing. Yeah, you know what? I want you to patrol my streets. I don't want someone robbing my house, stealing my car, attacking me. You go do that. And the other stuff, let's get some other folks who have the training, the experience, and the aptitude to handle more of the, let's say, softer might not be the right word, but the non-violent components of our civil disturbances. Let those people deal with it. We should all be on the same side on this, I would think.
And here's something that's happening, and I'm sure Michael, as a defense attorney, will appreciate. I know they've done this in DC, and they're trying, and somebody tried to do it in Baltimore, but I don't think it got any action, is separate the forensic science from the police department. DC has a forensic department that is answerable not to the police commissioner, but to a deputy mayor. The police, yes, crime scene people and police still work together, but the crime scene unit does not work for the police.
What John says is so important.
Yes, so so they become an independent agency, and at least in theory, as accessible to the defense as it is to the prosecution.
John is absolutely right. And I think this goes to the national level too. I've covered the FBI for 25 years, and I think by and large, with some slip-ups, they have a first-rate crime scene lab operation. But this shouldn't be the FBI. This should be an independent agency. Our judges are paid by the government and work for the government, but they're supposed to be independent. And I think it's too easy for even a well-intentioned detective to influence a lab result. And I think that what John says really goes across the board. It should be it should be a completely independent agency on every level.
All right. Thanks, guys. So I'm sorry, John, but we got to move on.
Okay.
Questions. So I think it would be impossible to discuss social issues in crime fiction without talking about Black Lives Matter. Now, several writers and current and former police that I've spoken to of different races and backgrounds have told me privately that they were incredibly frustrated that the movement behind Black Lives Matter refused to nuance the slogan to be Black Lives Matter 2, the 2 being the key distinction.
Absolutely.
What's your experience with the very real and sometimes explosive actions and emotions behind this movement, and what responsibilities as writers, what do we have in addressing it?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right, Russ, because saying Black Lives Matter, which absolutely is true, gets the counter slogan, all lives matter, which is kind of besides the point, because what the phrase really means is Black lives matter as much as white lives or as much as any other lives. And that should be the message. And so I've heard so many people in and out of law enforcement talk about the BLM movement as if this is some kind of subversive organization or a cult or, similar to any other, right-wing organization. And it shouldn't be, because all they're saying is, it's so easy to misinterpret things. I mean, next in Virginia, next to where I live, the new governor pledged that that critical race theory would no longer be taught in the schools. Well, guess what? It never was. And I guarantee you, 99.9% of the people have no idea what critical race theory really means, and yet it doesn't stop them from talking about it.
Well, part of the problem are the politicians who it is in their advantage
You
for
bet.
those people to know.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem with Black Lives Matter too, because Black Lives Matters makes sense. It's a good phrase, but the people who don't want that to be successful are misinterpreting it to mean what they want it to mean instead of what it really means.
Right.
And we allow them to do that. And that's part of the problem.
I'm
I'm sorry, you're not getting any disagreement from
Now,
us.
I agree with Michael that Black Lives Matter, or even just the initials BLM, is a good phrase. First of all, it focuses people's attention on the subject, and it causes discussion. It causes people to say, yes, but don't all lives matter? And to come back to that is, well, yes, they do, but all lives will not matter until Black lives matter. And as far as writers, I think we don't necessarily have to include that, but it certainly provides a source of dialogue in our stories, or at least conflict between two people who are actually having this discussion.
I guess my problem is unlike defund the police, I don't think Black Lives Matter is a bad phrase. I think the
No, it's
people
not.
are misusing it. The people who want it to fail are misusing it. And it's sort of like going to a fundraiser for cancer and having someone run in and going, all diseases matter. Yeah,
Right.
we know that.
Exactly.
But we're trying to concentrate on just one right now. That's the point.
Right.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Last but certainly not least, the Metoo movement arose within the last several years with a vengeance. And personally, I've been so heartened that so many women who had been abused and mistreated have found a voice and are forcing their male abusers to finally be held responsible for their horrendous actions. Now, my question is this: do you think that we've reached a point in society where Me Too is a movement? It had its moment, but it's going to sort of just peter out? Or has the movement fundamentally changed the way we talk truth to power?
It depends on who you talk to. There are politicians who still abuse women and their followers don't care. I don't know how you solve that problem, but I have to address this issue quite often when I have a trial. If I have a trial with a client who's accused of abusing a woman, I have to address that to the jury when I start. And I have to say, look, I agree with this idea, the Me Too movement. You need to listen to women. It doesn't mean they're telling the truth. Not everyone always tells the truth. And that's how I have to address it. But yes, you listen to them and then you decide whether they're telling the truth. The problem is people weren't even listening in the first parts.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's like what we were all talking about before, which is things which were accepted and commonplace a generation ago no longer are. I mean, in a way, I guess you would consider the Me Too movement as third wave feminism. So it's built on the past, and other things will come along and other things will have their moment, but it's not going away. The sensibility that we've achieved, I think, certainly is here to stay.
If anything, I think, it is still a movement. Unfortunately, there are still some people who don't get it. I won't mention the name, but there is a prominent NFL player who is in a lot of legal trouble for his alleged abuse of women. And I read an article online last week or so that the big issue seemed to be he's got to get in front of this. He's got to get it settled so that he can be traded to another team and make more money. Me, it would have been kind of like, well, you're not playing. Well, he's suspended now, but, it's going to be, well, once your legal troubles are over, then you're going to have to deal with the NFL, and we're going to decide whether or not you can still play football. Much like maybe it got more play in Baltimore than it did, but there was several years ago a Baltimore Raven named Ray Rice.
I remember that.
Was seen on film assaulting his wife, and he no longer plays football. But other people, depending on who you play for and all that, the major sports teams don't seem to be getting the message.
Well, that's not entirely true though. Trevor Bauer, who pitcher, signed $100 million deal or something with the Dodgers. They found out that he had a very, very rough and violent sexual relationship with a woman. The team suspended him under investigation, and he missed basically the entire season, and he may not come back.
Yeah. But still others are, are accused of, sexual abuse, and next thing you know, they're, one team drops them after one game, and the next thing a year later, he's playing for another team. So, I think in sports, but I think we're also getting away from the thing as far as, is the movement petering out, or is it still strong? And I think as a whole, it's not as, it's not on the news as much as it was. It's not being talked about as much as it was, but it has become part of it has become to the point where it is no longer just ignored.
Yeah, I think that's true. And to your point, Russ, I think in crime fiction, you're seeing a lot more of it. I mean, for instance, my friend Allison Leota, who is a very good crime fiction writer, she deals with these subjects all the time. She was a former prosecutor, and she's been through it all. And so, as long as people like Allison are writing, I think it's
Allison's wonderful. She gave a couple talks to the Mystery Writers of America, and I think she worked in DC's SVU, and she's got an hilarious story about $1 million ransom.
Yeah, and here's another example of somebody who deals with extremely grim, difficult subjects, and her books are great on humor. Some of it is self-deprecating, some of it is directed toward the main character, but it shows that you can deal with serious subjects in a contemporary and meaningful way, and still have some fun at the same time.
All right.
And if I can roll this around back to the police, I don't know what it's like now. I've been out of the department for several years, but when I first started with the police department, sexual assault victims did not receive the most compassionate treatment. One of the big breakthroughs was the training of forensic nurses so that they could interview the victim, and they could collect the needed evidence without too many people bothering them. Police officers, Baltimore went through a thing where, the special victims unit were not properly categorizing sexual assault, that, and I think there needs to be a study on just how well police departments in general are dealing with this subject. Are they still questioning the victim as if she were a suspect, or are they showing more care and compassion?
All right. Okay, that was great, guys. But as always, it's time for the special segment of the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I create especially for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are known unknowns, friend or foe, beer me, the vaccinator, tell it to the judge, the junk pile, and stranger in a strange land. All right, John, you're up first. You ready?
Ready.
All right. What do we got for you today? We got Stranger in a Strange Land. Okay.
Wonderful book.
Yes, for sure. So you predominantly write crime and mystery. What other genres would you like to write in that you have not written in already?
One of these days, all right, this way. I wish I had the time and the patience to do an historical mystery. And for those of you listening out there, if you want to do this, I will be the first in line to read it. I would love to write or either to read an historical mystery where the biblical Daniel is the detective. I mean, in the Bible, there is he solves a locked room mystery and does textbook police procedural on another case. I think there's a lot of potential in there, and I only wish I had the time and patience to write it.
Fair enough. All right, Michael, you're up next. You ready?
All right.
All right, face the wheel.
I'm getting hypnotized.
All right, what do we got? What do we got for you? For you, we got, all right, friend or foe? All right. So, okay. So, while working in the criminal justice system for many years, have you ever encountered a criminal or a suspect who you liked enough that you thought, if circumstances were different, we could be friends?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, especially because there's a lot of criminals that are just, I do a lot of DUI cases. These are normal people. I've had doctors and lawyers as clients. You know, everyone gets that. And I've had a lot of marijuana cases too. You know, they're nice people. They're smoking and it's going to be legal soon. I've met quite a few friends that I would get along with. Now, the real serious ones, no. You know, I've never, you know, the rapist, no, I don't think I can be friends with him. But, you know, there's plenty of crimes that are small and minor, and they're just normal people who get caught in the system sometimes. Quite often it's drug and alcohol problems. And once they solve those problems, they're really nice people.
Right on. All right, Mark, you ready?
Yep.
All right. Let's see. All right, what do we got here? Oh, beer me.
Excuse me?
Beer me. All right, so given the social unrest we've encountered over the last several years, we could all use a drink or whatever helps you relax. If you could sit down and share a beer with anyone who disagrees with your social or political points of view, and you could express anything to them in a calm, rational way, what would it be?
Well, you know, that's interesting, depending on the situation. You know, I just talked to Amanda Knox recently, and who we've written about, and who has actually become a close friend after we dealt with her case. She is hoping to set up a meeting with Mignini, the prosecutor who prosecuted her and kept her in jail for 4 years. I'd like to talk to him too and say, to me, this case was open and shut. It was very obvious what happened. The crime scene was clear. It was all of the evidence pointed in one direction, and yet he got it wrong. Why did he get it wrong? And what was it that made him so convinced that Amanda and her then boyfriend, Raphael Solecito, were guilty when there was no possibility from even the forensic evidence?
All right. Thank you, guys. So we're all in the writing business in one form or another. So I'm going to start with you, John. What's the best and worst advice you've ever gotten?
Okay, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from the late great C.J. Henderson, who, when it became apparent that I was going to be a short story writer, he told me to write my stories about the same character.
Yeah, you said that, right?
Yeah, and in those stories, give the character some growth, so that when I get enough of them, I've got myself a book.
There you go.
The worst advice, I don't know. I don't know if, I've come to think maybe there is no such, I mean, yes, there's bad advice, but you can learn from bad advice. I mean, I can't think maybe the best is the worst advice is write what you know, because that kind of limits you. I think it should be, is you should change it to don't write what you don't know. And if you have to write about, say, the prophet Daniel as a detective, don't just write it, until you know something about, the Bible and the historical period and the background of all, then go ahead and write it.
All right, Mark, same question.
Well, I think John certainly nailed it on the worst advice about write what you know. We'd certainly have no fantasy or science fiction if we couldn't use our own imaginations, which in a way is writing what we know. In fact, I was on a panel years ago with David Mamet in Los Angeles, and he used to teach writing to college students. And he said people would ask him, Mr. Mamet, should we write what you know? Should we write about what we know? And he'd say, what choice do you have? So in a way, that's what it is. As far as the best advice, I don't even remember who gave it to me, but it's the words I live by, which is what happens next. As long as you can keep your readers, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever, or viewers on television, wanting to know what happens next, they're going to stay with you. So I guess the corollary to that is do whatever you want, just don't be boring.
Fair enough. All right, Michael, what do you got for us?
Oh, yeah. Don't be boring is what I always, whenever I teach writing, that's my number one rule. Again, because there's really no rules in writing. If you can make it work, it works, but it's got to not be boring. The best advice I think I got was when I was writing my novel Bloodsuckers and I sent it off to an agent. He sent it back and said, you have a whole bunch of interesting stuff happening and the story doesn't start until chapter 10. And he was right, because part of the problem I think people have is they want to set up everything and a good story jumps right in and you grab it immediately. And that was really good advice. And I thought about it and I really try that with all my stories now. And I've noticed that my favorite stories jump right into the story.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, it's work that you have to do on your own, but it's not something that the reader has to necessarily be along with you for.
Exactly, but I was still learning at the time, and I was able to use that information. Just I had to fit it in elsewhere. Worst advice, boy. The problem is I don't necessarily remember the worst advice because I didn't pay attention to it. I think most of the worst advice I've gotten has to do with publishing and finding editors and finding agents and things. And a lot of people who say, "Oh, just publish it yourself and don't get an agent and don't get an editor." And then the people publish their own stuff and it looks terrible and it reads terrible, and it's not that you can't publish yourself, but you've got to get a good editor, you got to get a good cover, you got to treat it as if you are the publisher who's making you do all this stuff. And
Right.
Too many authors write something up and then send it out on Amazon and wonder why no one's reading it.
Right. Fair. I absolutely 100% agree on that one. All right. So speaking of being writers, we've got books for you folks out there. So if you bear with me, I'm going to share my screen and then we're going to see what we got for you. All right. Hang on 1 second. All right. What do we got here? All right. And share. Okay. So you guys seeing this okay?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Michael, what do we got here?
This is a Big Stick. That's my steampunk novel with Teddy Roosevelt there. The main character is the woman who goes with him. I wanted to use a Black woman in 1898 because part of the fun is having a person who has lots of barriers in front of her in order to succeed. So that was tremendous fun writing this. It's not to be taken too seriously. It's meant to be a fun adventure.
All right. Okay. Well, speaking of silly fun adventures.
Yes, after the first season of Mindhunter on Netflix, everyone was saying, or at least the people who wanted to talk to us were saying, "Gee, this is really fascinating. That the whole basis of profiling and criminal investigative analysis comes from talking to these predators in prison." So we thought, well, we should really take a deep dive and show 4 cases where John Douglas did talk to predators in prison and how he unlocked their secrets, how he was able to correlate what was going on in the offender's mind before, during, and after the crime to know how to capture them. So that's really what Killer Across the Table is all about.
Wow. I gotta add that one to my list. And if, for those of you who have not read Mindhunter, I have cover to cover, and whatever you thought of the show, the book's even better, in my opinion.
God bless you, Russ.
It's fantastic. All right. And then, John, what do we got?
Okay, Patrick Thomas, who's been on your show at least once, has created this series called Agents of the Abyss.
Yes.
Basically, it's all the public domain characters are all working either together or against each other, throughout the years. Our book, Frankenstein Monsters of the Abyss, is the first in the series. And essentially, it is our retelling of the Frankenstein story with putting in all the things that we think Mary Shelley either left out or got wrong. Michael will tell you that a story told by just one biased witness really won't hold up in court. And so we present multiple points of view. And it's called Monsters of the Abyss because there's more than one monster and it may not be who you think it is.
Excellent. Well, get it.
Plus there's a cat.
Yes. And God willing. So I actually have a book in this series as well coming out. I don't know when it's coming, but
third anthology, I think.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, thanks, guys. And as for me, if you're up for a little Blade Runner style sci-fi with your crime and mystery, I'll encourage you to check out my sci-fi noir Fractured Lives, featuring my hard-boiled intergalactic private eye Angela Hardwick, who's part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, and part Philip Marlowe in Fractured Lives. Hardwick is hired to find out if a college freshman, who is also a galaxy design savant, is suffering from a nervous breakdown or is the victim of an urban legend known as the Scarlet Raj. Fractured Lives is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. And if you want a signed copy, you can order them directly from me. I apologize to the folks at home. I skipped over our Q&A section. I did not intend to do that. So we're going to take a couple, before we sign off, we're going to take a couple of questions because I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard. Real quick, let's see. All right, so here's one for the group. Do anybody on the panel plan to integrate these recent social issues, Black Lives Matter, Defund the Police, Me Too, et cetera, into any of your future works? And if so, how? And if not, why not?
I don't think you can avoid it. I mean, it's just, if you're writing about the times, it just naturally comes in.
I'll agree. If you're writing about present day, you also have to talk about the virus. That's what life is like. I'm currently working on.
If you write I've written some historical fiction, and you write about the times as they were, just like John was saying.
Right. Actually, I have a book coming out in December. It's called Mortal Sins. My character, Matthew Grace, is now a forensic investigator for the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. And it touches on situations such as police, the state's attorney has tried to put police officers in jail for an in custody death. Which led to riots, riots in the city. There are police behaving badly. There's questions about integrity in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. Let me note that that everything is fictional. I am not targeting the current Baltimore City State's Attorney. And there's there's matters that stem from what happens if if demonstrations go bad in a particularly unforeseen way. So I think in some small way I've already addressed some of these issues that have come up.
All right. And as for me, I've got a short piece in an anthology put out by Keith DeCandido called The Four Horsemen of the Whatever. My story is the four. Are you in that as well, Michael?
I'm in that. My story is the four lawyers of the apocalypse.
Okay, that's shocking on that one.
Yes.
Mine's the four drummers of the apocalypse because I'm a drummer, but I deal with actually multiple of these issues I've compressed into one story. Okay, last question, and then we have to wrap up. All right, let's see. There was one more. Okay, this one is going to be, I know, John, you touched upon this. And the question is, how do you feel about these new procedural shows that are on now, including FBI to the CSI Vegas reboot? Good idea, bad idea, not original? What's your take here?
Let's talk about CSI. I don't watch it. I've watched one or two when they came out. And while some of the science was accurate, their procedures were crap.
For example, give me an example.
Okay. There was, I mean, it was one of these things you turn on and watch so that until you watch it because the show you want to see is up next. And they had this beaker of fluid that was vital to the case. And instead of taking a sample of the fluid and testing that, they dropped the testing ingredients right into the entire beaker so that, and Michael's going, I wish they'd do that because, and I could say that there's nothing for the defense to test, so basically they ruined it for any replicant testing. I did watch, the first, I think it was 2 seasons of FBI, despite its science fiction type, cyber stuff. And I don't think some of the stuff it is even possible is not possible right now. I tried watching, what was the other one? Most Wanted. I just lost interest. It wasn't that it was bad. It was the same thing every week. I think I've already expressed my views on the two of the Law and Order episodes. And although I was pleased to hear that Law and Order, the original series, is coming back for season 21, I shudder to think of what they might do to it.
I'm really curious to know what Michael thinks of this as a trial attorney, because all the prosecutors I talk to detest what they call the CSI effect, where juries are now conditioned to believing that everything has scientific evidence, and if it doesn't, there's no case. I mean, do you know how hard it is to lift fingerprints off most subjects? Do you know how unusual it is to have DNA in a lot of cases? So, Michael, I really would like to know what you think on this.
I agree with them, and the prosecutors have been saying that in my trials, because I will go up and say, "Well, where's the fingerprints? Where's the DNA?" And the prosecutor will have to address that, and they have to come and say, "Look, it's not like television, people," but juries still believe it, which works to my advantage, of course.
Yeah. I have a story about that. I was not in the courtroom when this was said. I did testify, but as you know, this is not Perry Mason, and all the witnesses do not get to sit in the courtroom for one of them to scream up, "Okay, I did it. But the sheriff's deputy who was in the courtroom said, "You were mentioned in the defense's closing statement." And it was something like, "You heard John French testify for the crime lab. And you heard that he did not recover any physical evidence from the scene other than a few unmatched cartridge cases. Now, if they were to make a TV show called CSI Baltimore, John would be the star. And if he couldn't find anything, there was no evidence to be found." And then he went on and on about why this should acquit his client. But I was appreciated. Even however hollow the words might be, I did appreciate it. But I would have rather been celebrated for something I did rather than what I didn't find.
And Russ, both of my brothers are doctors, and they criticize all the medical shows for the same reason. So, it's one of those cases where the more you know about a subject, the less accurate it is.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks, folks. That's our show. I want to thank you, to our guests, to Mark, Michael, and John, for a great hour and willing to talk about some touchy subjects. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and I'll see you all next week. All right. Thanks a lot, folks. Take care.
Bye.
All right. See you, folks.
Bye.
All right. Have a great week.